So welcome everyone. I think most of you are on mute. However, we're going to open up the question and answer period, hopefully for the whole last 20 minutes of this call. So if you can be patient until then, we look forward to hearing, having a dialogue and questions. My name is Stephen Bartlett with Agricultural Missions and the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, and we're very glad to kick off this call about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, and other free trade agreements that are threatening people in the current political moment. Many of you probably know that the TPP is an agreement that would extend to the countries that comprise about 40% of the world economy. So it's a very huge block of countries. And many of you also know that the Trade Promotion Authority, otherwise known as Fast Track, was passed by the Congress. So Congress is going to be faced with an up or down vote on this trade agreement without any ability to modify it or amend it in any way. Toward the end of the call, Patrick Woodall and Kathy Ozer will speak to us a little bit about the political dynamics in Washington, D.C. and what we can do now in terms of advocating with our congressional representatives around the TPP. So I'm very happy that we have a really broad range of speakers, and I'm going to introduce them one at a time as they're going to speak. The first one is a wonderful guy, Jim Goodman from Wisconsin, a dairy farmer, family farmer, member of the Family Farm Defenders. And I'd like to welcome him to take the mic and give us about 5 minutes of his perspective from small-scale family farmer.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Afternoon, everyone. I guess I want to start out just a little bit with some history of trade agreements and how they've basically failed farmers. The NAFTA agreement and the WTO were implemented back in the 90s, and the TPP is considered to be NAFTA on steroids. So to me, that says it's going to be even worse. But NAFTA was introduced in 1994 and WTO in 1995, and those two trade agreements in combination with the 1996 Farm Bill basically eliminated supply management tools, which limited the amount of grains or whatever that farmers could produce and kept the supply and the price somewhat stable. Well, prices eventually plummeted and Congress needed to do something, so they instituted emergency payments to stabilize farm incomes, which eventually developed into farm subsidies. And we still have those with us today that basically pay the farmers to produce but below the cost of production on the taxpayers' back. In the period from the early 90s until now, we lost about close to 200,000 small family farms in the U.S., which was just about a quarter of the total number. So it's pretty clear that these trade deals did not help us, and we see TPP being as bad or worse in many ways. And the first thing you need to know about TPP is that it's really much less a trade agreement than a corporate bill of rights. When it was written, and I'm sure some of the other speakers will get into this in more detail, but basically government negotiators and corporations wrote this deal, and everyone else was locked out. Even members of Congress couldn't read what was in the deal. The thinking was that, and I guess this comes from the U.S. Trade Representative, that about 95% of the people in the world that eat live outside the United States. And if we did pass TPP, we'd open up this huge market to agricultural exports. And that's true. We are going to send more U.S. agricultural exports, but they're going to be food products. They're not really going to be food. I know a lot of farmers, but I don't know any that directly export. They sell to grain companies, they sell to meat packers, they sell to dairy companies. Those companies in turn process and do whatever they want to the raw materials, and then they export it. They make the profit, not the farmers. Because as I said, under all these trade deals for the past 20 plus years, we've seen farm incomes go down. Reducing these tariffs are going to have a really positive effect on big agricultural companies, the big agribusiness companies, because they're going to be able to import or export more goods and save money, but they're not going to pass that increased income back to the small farmers. An example is Japan, which right now has about a 20% tariff on pork. A TPP would cut that, but there's a provision in the bill that Japan at any point could back out of that if they thought those imports were hurting their domestic producers. So they gave the Japanese farmers an out. Similar on dairy, Canada has a supply management program which they basically left untouched. So, and Canada doesn't have to import hardly any dairy products, at least on a time frame basis. It's going to be a number of years before they have to start increasing their imports. So Canada and Japan were basically allowed to protect their farmers. The U.S. farmers, not so much. A couple other things that we need to think about. The Canadian farmers, in addition to the dairy industry being protected, they're also protected by the government up to 100% of income if the TPP causes grain prices or any other Canadian farm exports to fall. So it's no wonder Canada was a little bit more willing than the United States to sign this. Some of the big targets that I see as a real concern of the TPP, things that it may eliminate. We already lost country of origin labeling under the WTO. GMO labeling could certainly be phased out under the TPP. Any label like local, potentially even organic. If some agribusiness company decides that food with that label on could possibly impinge their profits, they can sue under the TPP and cause that label to be taken away from us. The U.S. Trade Representative is really touting this as benefiting farmers and ranchers. He says it's going to open markets to the Asia-Pacific region. But again, as I said before, farmers and ranchers don't export. They sell to corporations that export. So that's where the profit will be going, not to the farmers. Another part of the TPP that the U.S. Trade Representative is touting is that it will prevent countries from imposing unscientific, discriminatory measures that create unfair trade barriers to American farmers. That could be code for GMO labels, any environmental protection programs that are more stringent than some of the corporations would like. So in effect, in addition to losing our labels under TPP, we could also lose many of our environmental protection programs if a corporation or a country decides to sue us under the TPP. Food safety, animal health, plant health measures, that can also be taken away because the total effect of the TPP is to bring production costs down to the lowest level possible. So I guess from a family farm point of view, I just look back at the other trade deals and see how they have caused us to lose a quarter of our farmers. This program is even worse in that we had absolutely no input into it. And as I said, it's nothing more than a corporate bill of rights meant to increase their profits, taking away ours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. There's a lot to chew on and get us rolling in this discussion. The next speaker I'd like to introduce is Brett Tolley of the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance, and he's here with a compañera, Kindra, from New Orleans. I'll let Brett introduce her.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Thanks for everybody being on the webinar, and thanks, Jim, for laying all that out. So again, I'm Brett Tolley. I'm from a 4th-generation commercial fishing family out of Massachusetts, and I currently work as a community organizer, spending most of my time with fishing families along the coast, East Coast and West Coast. So what I want to do is just give a quick overview, a very high-level overview of the fisheries landscape, or waterscape, as you could say, and then pass it off to Kindra. So, you know, in general, what Jim just laid out and many of the big challenges facing family farmers are being limited on the ocean side. And so we're seeing a kind of industrial, large-scale business over of our seafood business. Someone needs their keys. And so those are some of the big, large-scale challenges. We're seeing the industrialization of our seafood system squeeze out our smaller, mid-scale family fishermen who we believe bring the most ecological, environmental, and economic value to our communities. And so and part of what we're seeing also is this level of resistance and organizing that's happening. We just had the largest gathering of community-supported fisheries and value-based seafood businesses under the umbrella of a local catch network just gather back in February in Virginia to talk about our values and vision and building this bottom-up approach to a values-based seafood value chain. We just had a slow fish gathering down in New Orleans just a couple weeks ago, bringing over 200 fishers and organizers and values-based businesses together to talk about how to build that aspect of the movement. We're seeing fish workers get organized. There's a fantastic campaign in Massachusetts called Fishing for Justice, working for the labor rights aspect of the seafood. And we're seeing really exciting campaigns that are fighting the GE fish. GE salmon is a trending aspect of the seafood chain. And so while all this momentum is being built to confront these issues, we see the TPP as a threat that will completely undermine all of this good organizing work. And so with that said, I'll let Kindra take it from here and really share what the impact of this TPP will look like for a family and a fisherman with boots on deck and a community that will be heavily impacted by this policy. And Kindra and her husband both fish in the southeast Louisiana, and she's been a really key fisheries activist and a voice for the fishing community, not only in her own community, but within that region and becoming on a national level as well. So without further ado, go ahead.
Oh yeah, if folks can mute themselves, especially callers on the phones. Unfortunately, we're not able to mute essentially, so please keep the noise down. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, I will mute and pass it off to Kindra.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you everyone for being on the call. So again, I follow fisheries, multiple fisheries in our state and along the entire Gulf Coast. For us, the Trans-Pacific Partnership would only increase problems for our fishermen as a whole in our entire industry. Last year, with this fast track coming through and them trying to really push to get this trade agreement passed, we've seen an immediate effect on our prices for our shrimp at the end of last year. Where we've seen on a national level, or I'm sorry, on the stock market level, where there was only about a 10 cent decrease per pound in price, we were seeing anywhere between a 50 cents per pound decrease all the way up to a 90 cents per pound decrease for our product landing it here in the United States. And that was just with these processors and buyers hoping for the Trans-Pacific Partnership to pass. So if it does pass, I can tell you the increase in imports from everything from oysters to crab, lobster, shrimp, fin fish, we will see a major impact on our prices. But I think that we need to go a little bit further than it just economically impacting. And I say that with all due respect, don't get me wrong. I know that there's an economic impact for all of our family fishermen and our family farmers and anyone that creates a tangible good that these countries are wanting to send over. But it has to be about more than that. And for us as fishermen, we pride ourselves in delivering the best product that we could possibly deliver. We handle our product with a certain manner to make sure everything's ice cold, that it's getting to the dock as quickly as possible with some of our buyers. I cut out sometimes the dock and the truck because there's certain fin fish that they would like to have within 24 hours of it being landed on the deck of a boat. So I actually physically drive my fish to New Orleans. And, you know, it's about pride and product. And sometimes we have to make it about quality and not quantity. And in today's day and age, consumers are becoming more and more aware of where their food's coming from. And they care about it. They care about their health, and they care about what they're eating. With these imports, some of these countries, the message, some of these countries that are listed in this trade agreement are some of your largest aquaculture product producing countries in the world. With that said, some of their practices are not so quality controlled. And I mean, everyone knows about the problem with the lack of current inspections when we have seafood hit our borders and hit the docks. Foreign imports, that is. And, you know, according to some calculations that I've heard and read, there's about 1 to 2% of seafood that's actually physically inspected that's coming to port, and a large percentage of that is rejected. So we already do not have the inspectors in place to inspect what's already coming to port. I don't see anywhere any politician with any political will to increase the numbers on the inspectors or their process for the Food and Drug Administration to be able to inspect the imports that we currently are receiving. So I can't say that I can foresee a viable amount of inspectors being put into place to inspect these imports as they come to port here in the United States. So I think that with that said, we really need to keep in mind that people do care where their product comes from. For me, it's about pride of bringing a quality product to the dock and getting that to the table in front of someone as quickly as possible. You know, something that the farmer before me said was that you guys don't sell your product overseas, that you sell it to local companies here in the United States. Well, we're in the same boat, if you will. One thing, we don't sell our products overseas. We're not looking to sell our products overseas. We don't want to package our product and send it there. So we only provide here in the United States about 33% of the seafood consumed, of the species that we catch here in the Gulf. So I understand that we have to have some imports, but we're not going to be sending, there's no market for us overseas. Our market is strictly here in the United States, so we're not going to be sending our stuff overseas. About a month and a half ago, I attended a meeting where Senator Bill Cassidy came in, and it was a meeting for our Vietnamese shrimpers. And at that meeting, you know, the whole spiel, I'm here to work for you, he says, and this, that, and other. And when I finally stood up and brought up the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you could tell, you know, by the atmosphere that I kind of put him on the spot. And he didn't like it at all. But he backed the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There was no mistake about it with everything that he said at that meeting that day. But the way that he tried to sell this trade agreement to our shrimpers is by telling them that this trade agreement could create an avenue for their children or grandchildren to become millionaires, which is completely not true. Again, we don't sell our product overseas. We sell it here in the United States. So that's it's not just going to affect our shrimpers to the point to where they're not going to be able to buy a new truck this year. I've seen our stocks plummet since the BPO spill in 2010, and we're just starting to see some of our stocks rebuild over the last 6-8 months. So we're already booked, and with last year's price plummeting, with them just foreseeing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we can't take another hit. If our prices go down any further at this point with the current amount of product that we're landing, this could shut our entire industry off the coast of Louisiana down. And people need to understand that it's the rock in the pond, the domino effect. You know, we support our local groceries, our local hardware stores. Here where I'm at 10 years ago, everything was wiped to the dirt from Katrina. And I know I'm running out of time here. I'll wrap it up. But it took 3 years of me driving a 140-mile round trip to a bank Well, because of the current economic state in our area, our bank that we've had for the last 7 years is on the verge of possibly closing because no one's depositing any money. So we stand to lose not just our industry, but businesses throughout our community that our industry actually supports.
Thank you very much, Kindra. Thank you. That's very, very helpful information that you've shared. Now I'd like to pass the mic over to Jeb Koball, who is the liaison for the Presbyterian Church USA of a network of Peruvian organizations. It's part of the program called Uniendos Manos, and he has gotten on the call with us to give us a perspective from the Peruvian perspective and Global South perspective. Welcome to the call, Jeb.
Thanks, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. Our partners here in Peru began addressing the TPP about 5 years ago because of particular concerns around rights and protections that the TPP will provide to foreign investors. And this became a concern of ours because of work that we've been doing for almost 2 decades now in addressing the mining industry in Peru, the environmental and health impact from the mining industry, and advocating for effective legislation to regulate the industry. About 15 years ago, we became involved in a particular case in the Central Andes, a town called La Arroya, which is considered to be one of the 10 most polluted cities in the world, where 99% of the children have been tested to showing that they have severe levels of lead in their blood, as well as cadmium, arsenic, and sulfur dioxide. And the cause of that contamination, that pollution, is a lead smelter that is owned by a holding company based in New York City called Renco Group. And so for many years, with our partners, we've been advocating for effective emissions controls and the enforcement of those controls. And then around 2009, the tide turned a bit. Following the financial crisis in the U.S., metal prices on the stock market temporarily plunged, and so the holding company was going to lose a lot of money. And in fact, they were going to declare bankruptcy, and did declare bankruptcy for the lead smelter in La Arroya. And it was at that point where we were caught off guard because they then sued the state of Peru, claiming that their loss of profits and their eventual bankruptcy was due not to the stock market price, rather it was due to the environmental controls that they were trying to enforce. And they said this was a violation of their investor rights as provided through the U.S.-Peru Free Trade Agreement, which had been enacted earlier that year. And so they filed a lawsuit in an international tribunal, and that lawsuit is ongoing and will continue to be played out for another 3, 4, or 5 years. In the meantime, the plant is not operating, or it's operating at half capacity. And environmental regulation for the relative to emissions controls has been non-negotiable as this lawsuit plays out. And so what we learned when that lawsuit came about, we began to investigate how trade agreements allow for foreign investors like this holding company to sue governments in an international tribunal. We realized that there are hundreds of such cases happening around the world of foreign investors, multinationals, suing governments if they do not like a particular legislation that has been enacted in a country that will affect their profits. In effect, the trade agreement protects profits over people, and this is a very clear example of that. So we've been organizing with folks here around Peru. It's been heating up here in the last couple of months. We've had a series of marches, including one just last night. Thousands of people taking the streets, and there's been increased violent repression from the government, from tear gas to rubber bullets to trying to shut down the voice of the people and very little media exposure to the trade agreement itself. And when the trade agreement was negotiated, when the negotiations ended last fall, the government of Peru said at that point that they would not bring it before the Peruvian Congress until November of 2016. However, just last month, following a formal signing ceremony of the trade agreement, the state said it was going to try and rush it through Congress here in Peru as fast as it can. So we're really kind of on the watch right now. At any point, it could be placed before the Peruvian Congress to be ratified. So we're picking up our efforts down here, holding regional and national forums about the trade agreement, trying to educate as many people as we can. And our particular perspective is related to this, the investor rights that it provides, these rights to foreign companies to sue a government if it doesn't like its legislation. And it's not just corporations from the U.S. suing states like Peru. The U.S. as well has been sued, including a big one just a couple months ago. The U.S. is being sued by a Canadian corporation who was going to implement the Keystone Pipeline. They've sued the U.S. for $15 billion, claiming the profits that are going to be lost because of the halting that the implementation of the pipeline. So the investor rights provided by the TPP are a threat to democracy and national sovereignty in the global south and in the global north. So that's kind of where we're on it right now. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeb. Thank you. Next is Tirso Moreno, who's the General Coordinator or the President of the Farmworker Association of Florida. And I've asked him to give us perspective from immigrant farm workers with whom he has worked for many years. Tirso, welcome to the call.
Thank you very much. I got several points. Our organization has been for 32 years struggling and fighting to improve working and living conditions for farm workers. But it has not been easy. We had made some changes, but it's difficult. Even that we changed some policies. Still, farm workers do not have same rights as other workers. They have been excluded from the right to organize, to many other things such as minimum wage and overtime and you name it. Plus, also we have been working on changing the working conditions, and we have some improvements to protect the workers from exposure to pesticides. But it's not only changing policies. What we have to do also, we have to deal with lack of enforcement of those laws, and also the problem of every time it's the farm workers are more and more vulnerable and much harder to organize because they're very conditioned. But I'm going to go into the effects of NAFTA in Mexico and what was the consequences of that. Mexico, the Mexican farmers, a lot of the farm workers that we have now here in the U.S. are undocumented or documented from Mexico. And being under the H-2A program, the guest workers program, make them very vulnerable, more vulnerable than being undocumented here. After NAFTA, Mexico's migration, when the farmers in Mexico lost the markets for their products, and the big example is corn. Corn producers has lost their market support, and the U.S. multinational corporations has taken over the market of the corn. So Mexico depends on exported less quality corn from the U.S. That was a big example of the attack on food sovereignty for our people. Here in the U.S., the migrants, the immigrants are very vulnerable because of the changes on trying to criminalize the immigrants here. That's also real bad. While migrants are farmers are migrants and immigrants, the rights of the immigrants it has been to make them criminalize them instead of improving the rights for the migrants.
Thank you.
Hello?
Thank you, Tirso.
Yeah, I was not sure if that noise was for me to stop. Okay, that was it,
Yeah.
right?
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you for, and we'll have time for questions after a couple more speakers. So if you're on the call, thank you for your patience. And right now I'd like to introduce Patrick Woodall of Food and Water Watch. He says he's like the hotline guy for the TPP. And we're really glad to have him on the call because he's very knowledgeable about the TPP, what's in it, and also what the dynamics are in Washington, which I've asked him to touch on. Welcome to the call, Patrick.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be here. I think the speakers today have talked about some of the manifest flaws of the 25 years of corporate free trade deals that have run amok over farmers and farm workers and food sovereignty, obviously industrial workers and food safety and deregulation, a host of other terrible problems that have come with the free trade agenda. I think but it does pose us with a really exciting moment, which is right now, given the political climate and the fast track vote last year, we are actually standing on the precipice of delivering a huge victory for the fair trade forces over the corporate trade forces. Because I think, although it's a heavy lift, right, when you stand up against free trade, you're standing up against all the corporations. It's not just agribusiness, it's not just the seed companies, it's everybody. But I think this is a very exciting moment because given Trump, given Bernie Sanders, given the discussion about free trade that is now percolating everywhere, that people realize that this has been pretty much a raw deal for everybody but the 1%, everybody but the Wall Street crowd, everybody but the K Street lobbying crowd. So I think we can win this fight. We lost fast track in the House by about by 10 votes, which means we would need to pick up 5. And if we hold on to almost all the Democrats that voted no on fast track on TPP, and the kind of Trump crazy drives the Republicans towards us in a fury of anti-free trade populism, we can win this vote. And I think people recognize that in Washington. The corporate lobbyists have just like re-gelled into a new super coalition that is the Business Roundtable and the Chamber of Commerce and a bunch of other trade associations. They're pushing hard. The White House wants to get this done, which is the normal kind of the graybeards in Washington, the cocktail party set here in DC, plus the White House, plus K Street. That is who we're up against. But I think this is a winnable fight. There are coalitions across the country in key targeted districts. We are working to hold on to everybody that voted with us and to flip as many of those 28 Democrats that voted yes on fast track. And I think that electoral math is going to work out fine for us if we stick to our knitting and really hammer down and bird dog these members to let them know that, you know, it's time for them to stand with their constituents, to stand up for the people and not for the powerful special interests that are ramming these wretched trade deals down our throats. This is a moment of clarity for us. For those of us that were there in Seattle and managed to stall the WTO expansion, those of us who fought against fast track in 1998 and the and the free trade area of the Americas. This is like those moments. This is a moment for us to hand a huge defeat to the forces of corporate reaction and actually defeat the TPP.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. And finally, I'd like to introduce Kathy Ozer, who's the National Director of the National Family Farm Coalition. And I've asked her to talk about what are some of the actual things going on in terms of letters and congressional strategy to complement what Patrick, the very inspirational words that Patrick just gave us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad to be on. And I would just say for any others that have been on, that are on the call that have worked with Patrick, this is the most optimistic Patrick has ever been about any of the issues that we've worked on. And that optimism is because of what he just laid out, but it's also, I think, the opportunities we have to broaden the various constituencies and sectors and groups that are speaking out, both in their local communities and at field events and at forums and coming to Washington in various forms. I think the importance of keeping the pressure on right now is really essential, because while there has been more exposure and more hype given the presidential politics, one of the biggest concerns is the wheeling and dealing and deal-making that Patrick is describing, which in the past, in the cartoon that's up on the screen for people that are on the go-to meeting, kind of explains is often at key moments things do get pushed through and the pressure gets on. As all the other speakers were discussing at the beginning, the biggest challenge is that there's myths out there that this is good for the economy or good for farmers, good for fishers, good for workers. And our challenge is to make sure that our voices get into those conversations. And so really briefly, Congress leaves Washington tomorrow for the Easter holiday spring recess, and they don't come back to Washington until April 11th. So there's opportunities, if there's forums or meetings in your home districts or in your states, to make sure that you are there, you ask questions, or you respond to letters to the editor, and make sure that the people know that you're watching what they're doing on the trade-related issues. There's also some broad sign-on letters, and some of your organizations may have signed letters a couple years ago on what we were thinking was going to be in TPP. What's different about this letter now is that we actually, have the legislation, and we want to be raising very clearly that there's lots and lots of organizations across various sectors that are joining with us around some of the development issues, around food sovereignty, around food security. And so Karen Hansen-Kuhn from the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy has just circulated a broader sign-on letter where we're hoping to get many groups on by April 5th. If that timing is too short for your group, it can be a little later than that, but the goal is to get between the 5th and the 10th the sign-on letter together. And then there's a bunch of events in April here in Washington. Ecumenical Advocacy Days is here. There's going to be opportunities for other lobbying visits in mid-April. And our hope is to have this letter and talking points for all of the various groups that may be coming to Capitol Hill around different issues, and really about ways to really confront both the trade issues and the broader economic issues that we're all up against. So I think that's all I want to say right now is the Family Farm Coalition. We've been part of local events. If you're scheduling appointments and want to make sure there's family farm groups there, you can reach out to us or reach out to Patrick. He's helping to plug in to local coalitions that are fighting TPP. And while there's some specific congressional targets, part of what we want to do is make sure that members of Congress, when they're back at home, are hearing about this issue in a way that holds them accountable for what actions they take, whether the vote is in the next few months or is in a lame duck session after the election or whenever it may be. It's the promises and the commitments that are made now that will make the difference as to how that vote is held accountable at the time it's taken. So thanks for being on the call, and look forward to answering questions.
Thank you very much, Kathy. For those who are on the call, we're now going to open up for questions, comments, and I will try to direct. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then have responses from some of the folks, some of the guest speakers. So we'll open the call up.
Hi, I've got a quick question.
Yeah, could you just say your name and where you're from, your organization?
This is Tyler Short from Louisville. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, hi.
So my question is, if TPP gets passed in the U.S., what do the coalitions across the country do in response, like grassroots reactions to that trade deal?
Okay, maybe we can hear a couple other questions, and some of the guest speakers maybe can think about if they want to respond to one of these questions.
Hi, this is Al-Sadiq Al-Sheikh. I'm calling from California, Berkeley, at the Haas Institute.
Welcome. Go ahead.
So my question is, in terms of a strategy in relation to TPP and food sovereignty movement in the United States, I would like to hear the speaker just give us some, maybe kind of the nuts and bolts of how they want to see the strategy developed over time. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question, and then we'll open up to response.
Hi, this is Dan Bensonoff from NOFA, Mass.
Welcome.
Hi, I had a question. I read recently an interview between the Humane Society and President Obama in which he said that the TPP has the greatest potential to combat illegal fishing. I was wondering if one of the speakers could comment on whether that is that's a possibility.
Okay. So maybe Brett and Kindra can respond to that right away.
Sure. When they refer to illegal fishing, where are they trying to combat illegal fishing? Here in the United States, our fishery is one of the most regulated fisheries on the globe. Could you clarify that a little bit? When you say they said this is gonna combat illegal fisheries?
Yeah, the article wasn't specific, but I assume they were referring to maybe some of the countries in Southeast Asia where there's been a lot of reports coming out of fishing in waters that are illegal or using illegal labor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is Brett, and Kindra, feel free to jump in if you have a sense. Yeah, honestly, on my end, I was going to default to Patrick, actually, if Patrick has any knowledge of that. My familiarity with that particular international issue is pretty limited.
I am happy to answer. This is a total lie by the White House. So there are some, in the environmental chapter, there are a host of kind of glittery promises, but they are mostly toothless and mostly unenforceable. And the reality is that if they wanted to make this as strong as some of the prior trade deals, many of which have not been enforced adequately, is that they would make sure that efforts to curb illegal wildlife trafficking and efforts to curb illegal and unregulated fishing would be backed up with prohibitions and not with, basically the language in all this stuff says, shall seek to combat illegal fishing. There's no prohibition against the trade in illegal fishing. The reality is that these trawlers in the Pacific, that once you bring that catch into a place like Singapore, you know, it's it becomes just commerce. And the reality is that the trade deals, actually it's a weird thing, the trade deals view fish, they are included in manufactured goods. So the WTO and NAFTA think of a fish as more like a carburetor than like a steak. So, so I think there is a lot of very pretty language, and I think a lot of people have been fooled. The vast number of environmental groups have come out opposed to the language in the TPP on this chapter and around these issues because they lack the necessary enforcement and binding enforcement mechanisms to actually do anything about this problem.
Okay, and then we had a couple questions. Thank you. Thank you. We had a couple questions about kind of strategy, and I don't know if we want to touch what are we going to do if TPP is passed, but maybe some of you have comments on the strategy question.
I do. This is Karen Moskowitz. I'm in Seattle. I'm part of 350 Seattle. It's local climate change, and we're also part of the Washington Trade Coalition. And we in Washington State, there are a handful of our congressional delegation, although they are Democrats, they did vote for fast track, and a lot of them are leaning towards voting for the TPP, often because we're considered a trade state, and they hear the word trade, and they just kind of feel like they have to vote yes. In any case, we have been expanding our coalition and trying to pressure these particular representatives. Many of them are in areas which there are a lot of local farms. And I would love to, we are actually putting together a letter right now to our specifically targeted to our local congressional delegation. And we've done some outreach to local farmers, but quite frankly, there's been a lot of ambivalence, perhaps because we are in Washington State and there are a lot of exporters here. But I was wondering if Kathy, you and Kindra and Brett perhaps could, I don't know if you have any members here or outreach. I could send you links to our sign-on letter that we are putting forward here, because they're really trying to expand our coalition beyond our environmental, climate, and labor groups to the people on the food side of things.
Oh, that's great. I'd be happy to get a copy. Is the idea to have individual farmers or fishers sign the letter as opposed to organizations?
Both, but we're expanding it to all. We also have I suppose, I don't know if there anywhere you can type stuff on here. I'm not sure, but I can send an email to Patrick or Tristan, however, I have Patrick's email here, whoever is the best person to get this out. But basically all of the above. I just went to there's an organization here called FORK, which is local farmers, fishers, chefs, is kind of a, table movement. And I went to this, they have a big conference once a year, and I went to it and I spoke to a lot of people. And I was actually, it was amazing to me how many of the smaller local farmers as well as shellfish operators here really had little or no knowledge on the subject. So I'm just looking for ways to kind of here locally get the word out.
Right. Unfortunately, some of the national groups, particularly some of the farm groups that have been most opposed to the trade agreements, we don't have particularly strong groups in Washington State. So, but I think it's really important, and that's part of the goal of this broader letter that hopefully will tap into some of the other communities that care a lot about individual laws or individual provisions that unfortunately are very vulnerable through the trade agreement. So we are trying to broaden that message, and in different parts of the country there's been efforts over the years to make sure that people are better understanding just how trade undercuts really important domestic laws that many of us have fought for, or even state regulatory efforts. So that's part of the education on this, and appreciate what you're doing on it. I think just really quickly to answer the question that was asked about particularly the strategy developing around the food sovereignty movement, I think one of the most important parts strategically that we figure out is how we explain and engage people in understanding that these policies are detrimental and have really negative impacts both for farmers and food communities in the U.S., but also for the communities globally, and that the whole issue of pitting farmers in this country against farmers in other countries under the myth that exports are going to solve our problems is really at the core of the importance of farmers and peasants and fishers being able to recover fair pricing and fair markets within their own communities and not to be forced into that situation. But I think certainly that question that you were asking about the strategy is a much bigger conversation than we can have on this call, but we're certainly hopeful that heightening the critique here in the United States and exposing that there are many organizations and many people who are speaking up in opposition to a kind of policy that totally dismantles our own ability to have control over our local food system or our whatever, not just local, I mean broader food system, are the same kinds of policies that are totally dismantling to the food sovereignty of people in other parts of the world. And the importance of, which is how we started the call, of how much corporate influence there is over the negotiations of the agreements and who's actively lobbying for their passage, is just one small example.
Thank you. And I would add that if you could send whatever information you'd like to share with Tristan, we can get it out to the various listservs of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance as well. So, and we have members in Washington State that are part of our alliance as well. Let's open up for another round of 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah, hi. This is Tlalok from the Real Food Challenge, National Student Network of Food Organizers and Advocates. I thank you for the presentation and all the speakers. I wanted to float out maybe a conversational topic around the issue of the best way of getting students and the institutions that they are a part of to speak this narrative of anti-TPP and to raise pressure on the local and the national level against the TPP. Wondering what are some best practices for that? What are some ways we can plug folks in, and also engage them in around the rhetoric and the language here, especially because a lot of the institutions that the schools that students go to, I mean, you can run into a lot of pro-free trade rhetoric, pro-free trade professors and language, and sometimes it's really difficult to overcome that if a professor is telling the students, like, this is a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. Do any of the guest speakers like to address that? I would just one thought was that maybe you, being from the Real Food Challenge, might be able to tell us some ideas. But the other is that I think student groups that are dealing with social justice issues like sweatshop labor, like farm worker rights, I think those groups could easily add into their narrative, the whole issue of trade and its impact on their constituent, the workers that they're being in solidarity with. Maybe other guests have some further thoughts?
This is Al-Sadi. Can I add very couple things very quickly to how we can engineer kind of response against free trade and in particular TPP. So I work at Hudson Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society here at University of California, Berkeley. And we just published a very decent report in the TPP in relation to three particular themes that we thought younger generation and people who work against free trade around the globe could pick up on it, and particularly for the U.S. One of them is we critique the absence of democratic participation when trade deals are being negotiated, and also the issues of transparency and public accountability. So I think students could pick up on those and in raising awareness within their classroom and kind of push back against their professors when people just cite the benefits of free trade. If you would like a copy of the report, you just could look at Trans-Pacific Partnership, Cooperation Before People and Democracy, Haas Institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Other comments or questions?
Well, this is Kathy, and just in response to the question that was asked before about what do we do if it passes in terms of the response, I would say that the stronger the organizing and the contacts people have now in terms of weighing in for the opposition and developing the talking points and more to what was laid out in outreach in Washington State is really, really important. And we're going to have some time. It's not clear how much time before a vote, and I would hope that that we are in a situation that this does not pass. And so, figuring out how these issues become much bigger issues for the national debates that we work on is really important. And that unfortunately, this is not the only trade agreement out there, and there's other concerns and movement forward on a U.S.-European trade agreement, and so the importance of increasing the opposition and the members of Congress to know that they're being opposed at lots of different levels around these agreements is really important. And everyone's been working together as a coalition, and then if something bad like the passage does happen, it becomes a whole lot easier to figure out the response at that point. And hopefully that's not going to be the outcome in this particular case.
Yeah, let me.
Thank you. At this point, I would prefer to think that we're going to defeat the TPP and then start to work on repealing NAFTA and CAFTA. But that's maybe. So what do others think? We still have another 2-3 minutes on the call.
Stephen, I wanted to answer this question too, and I think you're absolutely right. The first thing is to kill this trade deal, and this is a killable moment. Look, people that are on the call that know me know that I'm more ordinarily the Eeyore than the Winnie the Pooh in these circumstances, but I have to say that I think that over the last 25 years, this is the most fruitful moment to kill a corporate trade deal ever. And if we work together, we can do it. Look, under fast track, the president has to submit the TPP, and then there are 90 legislative days for Congress to consider it. But because they're on recess practically the whole year, that means that even if they introduced it today, we wouldn't get a vote until possibly after the election. And that's where they want it, where the people can't see it, as far away from the voters as they can get. It's up to us to hold people accountable now and to make it incredibly difficult for them to vote for a deal that's going to screw their constituents. This is a winnable moment if we pull together. I realize we all talk at a lot of windmills, but this is not a moment to plan a press release for our defeat. It's a moment for us to organize together for our victory.
Thank you so much for responding to that question, both of you all. It sounds like you're saying that right now is a moment of clarity for us to organize, and if TPP gets passed, we continue that organization, and that's why it's so fruitful, is because of the coalition building that's happening now and can continue. Thanks for responding.
I would prefer that we not say if TPP passes. We just shouldn't say those words.
Hi, this is Jeannie from the Farmworker Association. I think one thing that I don't hear coming up in talking about the TPP is that President Obama calls himself the climate change president, and yet if the TPP were to be enacted, it would be one of the worst contributors to climate change because of all the exports and imports into other countries and all the goods going to all kinds of other places, not to mention facts of land grabs and big corporations going into other countries and grabbing land and cutting down forests. And I think that connection to climate change and climate justice, because a lot of subsistence communities would be impacted because of land grabs by big corporations, especially agriculture. I think that point is really important to make, especially because Obama calls himself the climate, that he's the president that's trying to work to reverse or to stop climate change. So I think we need to be sure to make that point too.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very excellent point. I agree 100% because we have to think about the TPP as really just one other tool of the corporate, destruction, extraction of all the resources of the earth. So I think if we frame it in that way, I think people will really understand it. And maybe that addresses some of the questions that came before, how to get students to see the relevancy of this. We're out of time. I'd like to honor the time that everyone took to be on this call. I want to thank the guest speakers and thank everyone who took time to spend this hour thinking about the TPP and thinking about what our next steps are. Please be in touch, and I think we can defeat the TPP. And thank you very much for all your input and for all the work you're going to do on this. Thank you very much, and so long, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith.
Thank you.